Amen. For those of you still in here, just a quick reminder, there's going to be a VBS volunteer meeting at 1:30 after church. At 1:30. If you have time to go, grab some food, come back, volunteer meeting at 1:30. Because VBS is this week. Are you excited? Amen. We are too. You know, last week, Pastor Slaughter taught us how to fight to keep our word. He taught us that as disciple makers, we must fight to keep our word that we give. In Joshua 9 and 10, Joshua gave his word to the Gibeonites, a people who deceived him. He gave his word to be their allies, to help them, and vowed to protect them. God holds us, holds you, he holds me to our word. Did you know that? The words that we give, God takes very seriously. And God took this word seriously. In Joshua 10, 5-6, we learn that the 5 Amorite kings joined together to fight Gibeon. They have heard that they've made allies with Israel, and they are not happy. And they joined together to fight to take out this massive power that is Gibeon. Joshua's word is finally in the place where it has to be tested. Making a word is one thing. Proving that you're going to keep it is another. But to Joshua, a man of God, there is no other option but to keep it. We learned finally how we win, and that's by keeping that word and fighting for those that we've given it to. Now, today's message is titled, Executing Disciples' Enemies. We are coming right off of the heels of last week, continuing in chapter 10. Because the word we give is that we will help defeat our disciples' enemies. So today we're going to learn how we can teach our disciples to execute their enemies. How we can join them in the fight so that no enemy kings are left. Turn to Joshua 10. The first way that we help our disciples execute their enemies is we give whatever it takes. Whatever it takes. Look here. We're going to start at verse 6. The men of Gibeon sent to Joshua at the camp of Gilgal, saying, "Do not relax your hand from your servants." They're asking for help. They're saying, Gibeon, the kings are coming after us. We need you. You gave us your word. Come up to us quickly and save us and help us. For all the kings of the Amorites who dwell in the hill country are gathered against us. So Joshua went up from Gilgal, he and all the peoples of war with him, and all the mighty men of valor. The Lord said to Joshua, "Do not fear, I have given them into your hand." You see, finally, the opportunity for Joshua to act on his word is there. And we see in his response how to do this. To give whatever it takes. Look what it says. He went up with all the people of war with him and all the mighty men of valor. You see, up until now, it was just a word. Up until now, it was a vow. Now, it requires action. See, there is a time when the vows you have made are just that. They're a vow. The proof of the vow that you've made in your character is when it gets tested. You see, Joshua takes the first steps in executing the word he gives. His response shows his dedication to the word. He doesn't just send someone else. He doesn't send, let me send a little part of our army, like the JV team, right? No, not at all. It says he takes all the men of war with him. He takes the mightiest men of valor. You see, his word was so important to him. Executing the enemies of Gibeon was so important to him, he would risk everything. Israel was not the one under attack. Gibeon was. They were encamped around them. And Joshua gave his word. And so his response is to give whatever it takes. This is something I have personally fallen short in several times. I think back to a funny story. It wasn't funny then, it's funny now. Me and my beautiful bride were living in Elgin with the Clavies and the Masseys. Whoop, whoop. It was late at night. We were having a conversation. Couples, you know what I'm talking about. And my wife was pouring her heart out to me, telling me what the Lord was showing her, what was hard, what was difficult, opening up herself to be shepherded. And I remember listening, praying, Lord, how do I respond? And then suddenly my response was this. Having this conversation in bed was the first mistake. But you see, I wasn't willing to give whatever it took. I had made a vow to my wife on our wedding day to shepherd her, to be there for her, to wash her in the Word. And right then, I wasn't living up to that vow. You see, Joshua made good on his vow to a people that deceived him into making it. Joy didn't deceive me into being married to her. It was my idea. I proposed to her. I was willing, excited. Please, marry me, please. I thought that since I was 12. We met at church camp. I'm like, please marry me. But you see, if Joshua can hold his word to a people who made a relationship with him out of deception, how much more for the men of God to those they willingly gave their vow to? A disciple maker executes his word, comes with everything he's got, full attention, his best, fully prepared. Disciple makers, this is also like for you. Someone's come to you. I need help. I need encouragement. Pouring out their difficulties to you. Can we meet for coffee at 6 a.m.? I got to go to work at 7. Okay? Yeah, we can. They're coming to you and they're hungry. Their heart is ripe. And I've done this several times myself. Show up, no preparation. Show up expecting just to give some advice my dad gave me back in 98. Expecting to read him some verse that I read a week ago. That's not giving our disciples whatever it takes. Giving our disciples whatever it takes is seeking the very face of God for them. When they are going through hardship, bearing their burdens as our own. When we have trouble, we certainly are good at calling out to God. I know I am. Lord, help me, I have so many issues. When it's with someone I've given my vow to, that's a testing. That's a testing of how far I'm willing to go to execute their enemies. You see, coming with the word from the Lord, something new, something you have sought the face of God for, is giving whatever it takes. Do you hear me on that? When someone is coming to you, whether it's your wife, it's a disciple, we have to give him whatever it takes. You see, he didn't just give his best. Let's keep reading. Look at this. It says in verse 8, and the Lord said to Joshua, do not fear them, for I have given them into your hands. Not a man of them shall stand against you. So Joshua came upon them suddenly, having marched up all night from Gilgal. When he heard the cry, his response wasn't, okay, let me do a few things. I got a bunch of things to figure out here, and I'll get there when I can. He got up, gathered his men, and went. Didn't wait for sunrise. Didn't wait for a better opportunity where things were taken care of at home. Didn't wait for everything to be perfect. The call came, and the answer was yes, because he made a vow. Because there were enemies that needed executing. The march from Gilgal to Gibeah would have been about 15 miles. It's a little farther than here to Elgin, a little farther. Through the night. There's not street lights in ancient Israel. There isn't a bunch of buildings. There isn't a GPS. There's darkness and the light of your torch. You see, Joshua left his place of comfort, Gilgal, where everything was nice, went into a dark scenario for someone else, taking the best he had and going into their chaos. Disciple makers, you know what this looks like. You've been there. When you're at home with your family, having a great evening, you're sitting down for a movie or whatever you may do, you get the call, hey, we need help. You get the call. Maybe someone living upstairs, hey, can we talk? I need you. They're crying. They're desperate. You see, that's a picture of you leaving Gilgal, leaving your place of comfort where everything seems nice to walk into a place of chaos that needs order. You see, that's what it means to be a peacemaker. Someone who brings the peace of God with them into every circumstance. When our word demands an execution, we have to give whatever it takes. You know, maybe a disciple has failed you many times over, but keeps coming back for help with humility. Do we give them everything it takes? Forgiving them 70 times 7. Encouraging them, building them up, correcting them once again. When your child has done the same thing they always do, if it's Wilder, it's usually he's trying to play sword and hits his brother Bodie. When they have made the same mistake over and over again, it's my response to give him whatever it takes to properly discipline him. Or is it, he's done it a million times, I'm too busy. We cannot be too busy to execute the vow. I cannot be too busy to teach my son the things of the word when he needs to hear them. We cannot be too busy to teach the word to those who are coming hungry, no matter how frustrating it may be, how many times they have done it. We've given our vow to them. A disciple maker whose mission is to execute the enemies of his disciples will give whatever it takes to fight the battle with him. Their time, comfort, resources, full attention, compassion, and heart. Joshua took the best that he had at a time that was bad for him to fight for Gibeon. Someone who had deceived him. How much more for the very family of God? Joy, I want to give you whatever it takes to fight for you. Rob, disciple of mine, man, I want to give you whatever it takes. Asa's somewhere in kids' church, but he's hearing this. Asa, I want to give you whatever it takes, man. Worship team, kids coordinators, I want to give you whatever it takes. Husbands, look at your spouse right now. Look at your wife. Call her by name and say, I want to give you whatever it takes. You see, man, we've made vows to these people. Willingly, excitingly, not out of deception, out of love. To keep that word, to execute their enemies, it requires whatever it takes. Let's keep reading. Pick up in verse 8. We're going back to verse 8. The Lord said to Joshua, do not fear them, for I have given them into your hands. Not a man of them shall stand before you. Joshua came upon them suddenly, having marched up all night from Gilgal, and the Lord threw them into a panic before Israel, who struck them with a great blow at Gibeon and chased them by the way of the ascent of Beth Horon, and struck them as far as Azekah and Makkedah. And as they fled before Israel, while they were going down the ascent of Beth Horon, the Lord threw down large stones from heaven on them as far as Azekah, and they died. There were more who died because of the hailstones than the sons of Israel killed by the sword. You can't make this stuff up. There is no way Joshua was thinking, I bet stones are going to fall from heaven today. That's what I foresee happening. The Lord loves to show up in miraculous ways. And that's our next point. If we're going to execute our disciples' enemies, we have to expect the miraculous. He has taken everything he has into the fight to stay true to his word, and the battle is not easy. 5 cities rallied together with hate against Gibeon. They've marched all night, exhausted. Have you ever stayed up all night? Right? Do you feel like really going to war in the morning without your coffee? Do you feel like you could really fight someone for another 2 days, which is what's going to happen? No, but that's what they did. They gave it their all. They know that they have made a covenant with Gibeon, and since they have made a covenant with them, they are their enemy too. They are taking ownership of those who they've made a vow to and their enemies. See, many times in Israel's history, they've been faced and will be faced with the odds stacked against them. This is certainly one of those times. The only assurance they had was not the numbers, was not the strategy, it was the word of the Lord. Look at verse 8 again. It says, the Lord said to Joshua, do not fear them, for I have given them into your hands. Not a man of them shall stand before you. Their confidence was not in themselves. It was in the Lord. And their drive to execute the enemies was not because of the circumstance, but because of their vow, because of their word. This reminds me of a famous movie that Shane Morrison loves, and many others do as well, called Lord of the Rings. You guys seen Lord of the Rings? At the very beginning, before they go on their quest, Aragorn makes a vow to Frodo, you have my sword. He gives his vow, I am going to protect you. I am going to fight you. And that vow was tested a few times, but there was a certain point in the climax of the movie that was tested at a greater measure. Do you have that clip, Shane?
For Frodo.
You see, the surrounding armies didn't matter to Aragorn. Come on, and I'll pump you up. Want to grab a sword and fight? You see, the armies surrounding them didn't bother Aragorn. It wasn't intimidating to him to fight these enemies, right? He knew he gave his word. And he knew that word demanded an execution. For Frodo, he says, sword in hand. There's an old Bible scholar named Joseph Benson. He's commenting on Joshua 10, and he says this, as it pertains to the word of the Lord giving confidence. He says, it is true, God had promised that he would, without fail, deliver the enemies into his hand. But God's promises are intended not to slacken, but to quicken our endeavors. I'm going to read that one more time. Something really special hidden here. I want you to grasp. It is true, God had promised that he would, without fail, deliver the enemies into his hand. But God's promises are intended not to slacken, but to quicken our endeavors. The word from the Lord gave Joshua the confidence and urgency he needed. When the promises of God come, they do not give us a license to wait for the fulfillment lazily. They give us a fervor to act upon them. when the word of the Lord came to Joshua, I will defeat them. It wasn't time to, okay, well, I should just wait here. I have my sword. They're going to come, and the Lord's going to take them down for me. No, he marched to battle confidently. It gave him the urgency he needed. This reminds me much of David in 1 Samuel 16. You see, when David faced Goliath, he had that security in the Lord. He struck down the bear. He's helped me struck down the bear, struck down the lion, and he will do the same to this dirty Philistine, right? Yeah. And so when the time comes, he doesn't sit there waiting for Goliath. It says that he picked up stones and he ran to Goliath. When the word of the Lord comes for us to execute on our vow, we have to run. And when we're in that place is when we expect the miraculous. Aragorn was hoping for the miraculous in this scenario. They were outnumbered 1,000,000 to 1. David was expecting the miraculous in that moment. This was a Philistine, armored head to toe, mighty warrior, and he had some rocks and a slingshot. But see, the situation didn't matter. The word and the word from the Lord is the only thing that mattered. He's in the fight, traveled all night, depending on the word of the Lord is the only thing that gives him security. I'm just going to tell a bunch of stories about me and Joy today. Is that okay? Back when, a year and a half ago, it seems like an eternity ago, when COVID hit, everybody was in their homes, lockdown happened. The Morrisons came over to our house and gave us some groceries. And Joy was pregnant with Bodie, big time. Okay? We believed we had heard from the Lord to have a home birth. And we were standing on that promise. The day comes, the day after I quit Cornerstone, to start working here with the pastors. A lot of things happening at once. It's usually how it goes. So Bodie begins to come. Labor is happening. Things are going so well. Standing on his word. Yes, he's doing it. He's giving us this baby at home. Yes. Stepping into our calling at the church. Yes. Victory, victory, victory. And then, in the middle of it, things took a big turn south. I won't share too many details with you, but Joy was bleeding a lot during labor, the last half. And suddenly, in weakness, the confidence was starting to dwindle. The fear was starting to rise up. We get to a moment. Joy is 8 centimeters right there. There's a lot happening. The midwife is saying, we should probably maybe go to the hospital or stay. Your call, Dad. So I go, everybody out! Everybody out of the bedroom. And I hold my wife close and we seek God. And what does he say? Expect the miraculous. He says, expect me to move in a way where you can execute what I told you I would give you. You see, our faith wasn't in the circumstance. It was in the word from the Lord, and that he is a God who gives miraculous things. About 20 minutes later, we had Bodie. And my amazing wife was full of strength and faith the whole way. And he showed up. And it's testimony to his faithfulness and his miraculous power. This is exactly what Joshua is doing here. He is expecting something miraculous. Look what happens. In the middle of the fight, the Lord threw down large stones from heaven on them as far as Azekah, and they died. There were more who died because of the hailstones than the sons of Israel killed with the sword. At that time, Joshua spoke to the Lord in the day when the Lord gave the Amorites over to the sons of Israel, and he said in the sight of Israel, "Sun, stand still at Gibeon, the moon in the valley of Ajalon." And the sun stood still, and the moon stopped. You see, Joshua is completely determined to finish the fight. It would have been very common in this era when nightfall comes to cease fighting. Everybody goes back to their camps. It's pitch black out. You don't know who your friend is, who the enemy is. Joshua knows this, but he is determined. So instead of settling for waiting till tomorrow to deal with what could be done today, he expects the miraculous. He wants to finish what he started. He wants to execute the enemies of those he has made a vow to. So instead of saying, okay, just fight a little faster, okay, do this, what are we going to do, wait till tomorrow? He asks the sun to stop moving. Who does that? Someone who knows the Lord can move in amazing ways, that's who. Someone who has seen God part seas and deliver them from Egypt, that's who. Someone whose faith is not in their circumstance, but the Lord. So he asks God, God, stop the sun from moving so I can finish this. What does the Lord do? The sun stopped in the midst of heaven and did not hurry to set for about a whole another day. There had been no day like it before or since when the Lord heeded the voice of a man, for the Lord fought for Israel. The Lord desperately desires to partner with disciple makers to execute enemies. He desires to partner with you in supernatural ways to conquer any enemy, any stronghold. Many times I have found myself faced with enemies of a disciple, where they're beaten down, discouraged, in need of help. And as I watch, I don't know what to give them. Have you ever been there? I'm at a loss for words. Asking the Lord, praying in the Spirit. Sometimes it feels like there's too many enemies, right? There's not enough time in the day to fight. Joshua teaches us something, that when we call on his name, we expect miraculous things. The Lord will heed the voice of man. The Lord desires to listen to the righteous. Turn to Psalm 50. We're going to start at verse 15. Sacrifice thank offerings to God. Fulfill your vows to the Most High, and call on me in the day of trouble. I will deliver you, and you will honor me. When we are fulfilling our vows, we call on God, the Most High One. He will answer with the supernatural. Time after time, sitting with someone who is broken, crying out for help, I have found the word from God. Me and Joy, in the midst of hardship, asked the Lord for something miraculous, and he showed up. He stopped the bleeding. He expedited the birth process, and we had a son. Joshua calls on the sun and moon to stop moving. Have you ever found yourself with a lot of enemies surrounding you and not enough daylight? When we call on the miraculous power of God, he will send stones from heaven. He will stop the sun from setting because he desires for us to keep true to our word. And he wants these enemies executed as well. This fervor of Joshua helped him execute these enemies. He knew they had to be taken care of. They were still remaining. Let's bring this to our last point. The last way that we execute our disciples' enemies is we draw everything into the light. I'm going to pick up in verse 15. So Joshua returned, and all Israel with him, to the camp at Gilgal. These 5 kings fled and hid themselves in the cave at Makkedah. And it was told to Joshua, the 5 kings have been found hidden in the cave at Makkedah. And Joshua said, roll large stones against the mouth of the cave and set men by it to guard them. But do not stay there yourself. Pursue your enemies. Attack their rear guard. Do not let them enter their cities, for the Lord your God has given them into your hand. God has come with the support of heaven to help Joshua execute his word. The sun did not set for an extra day so they could finish the fight. It would be easy to stop here. At this point, they had won. They were retreating. They were fleeing. Hey, we won. Hooray, celebrate, back to Gilgal. Woohoo! No. You see, Joshua is in the execution business. He wants to finish it fully. Not halfway. Finish it fully. Verse 20. When Joshua and the sons of Israel had finished striking them with a great blow until they were wiped out, and when the remnant that remained of them had entered into fortified cities, then all the people returned safe to Joshua in the camp at Makkedah. Not a man moved his tongue against any of the people of Israel. Again, great place to stop. Everybody's safe. Don't have to do anything else. No more violence. We're all good. Not for Joshua. Then Joshua said, open the mouth of the cave and bring those 5 kings out to me from the cave. And they did so, and brought those 5 kings out to him from the cave. The king of Jerusalem, of Hebron, the king of Jarmuth, the king of Lachish, and the king of Eglon. And when they brought those kings out to Joshua, Joshua summoned all the men of Israel and said to the chiefs of the men of war who had gone with him, come near, put your feet on the necks of these kings. Then they came near and put their feet on their necks. And Joshua said to them, do not be afraid, do not be dismayed. Be strong and courageous, for thus the Lord will do to all your enemies against whom you fight. And afterwards Joshua struck them and put them to death. You see, Joshua refused to let any enemies remain. The 5 kings are still hiding. The 5 reasons this battle happened in the first place were not yet dealt with. Have you ever pulled weeds and gardened? Right? You can take your weed whacker and you can cut up all the weeds and it looks really nice. It seems like all the work is done, but there's a root still there. And without the root uprooted, the weed will just come back. Without these 5 kings executed, what do you think would happen? They would just come back for more. If they didn't deal with the actual problem in the scenario, the problem would persist and come back later, likely with more force than before. We can fight a battle for a long time and think it's over. But if the reason for the battle has not been executed, then the battle is really not over. You guys pick up with what I'm saying? You can deal with someone having anger issues, right? You see them lash out against a father figure, against a disciple maker, say something they shouldn't have said, get angry. And you can deal with that anger. You can show them the word. They should be slow to speak, slow to be angry like the Lord, and help them repent for that. But if there is still a king hiding in the cave, the anger will just come back. Maybe that king in the cave is past abuse from a loved one. Maybe that king hidden in the cave is a father figure who let you down. Maybe that king hidden in the cave is a hidden sin you've never forgiven yourself for, never brought into the light. Joshua knew these kings had to be taken out of the cave, out of the darkness, brought into the light so they could be executed. if he didn't do that, they would just remain. He knows they are in there. He knows there's more in there. What does he do? See, he draws them out. Turn to Ephesians 5. Verse 8. It says, "For you were once darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Live as children of light. For the fruit of the light consists in all goodness, righteousness, and truth. And find out what pleases the Lord. Have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. It is shameful even to mention what the disobedient do in secret, but everything exposed by the light becomes visible, and everything that is illuminated becomes a light." These kings are still in the dark. There are hidden things in your disciples' heart. They're the reason this battle happened in the first place. They must be drawn out. You see, as a discipler, as Joshua, he couldn't be the one to draw out the enemy. Do you see that in the text? Look at this. Verse 22, Joshua said, "Open the mouth of the cave and bring those kings out to me from the cave." When you're with someone and you are seeing, you are in the battle for their heart, for their soul. You are seeing maybe that anger rise up, that frustration, the pain, the sin, and you're cutting off the top of the weed. You look like you're gaining ground, and you know there is more underneath. Disciples, I know you've been there, where you know there is something hidden in the cave. It may take something miraculous to find out what it is, but it's there. And you see, Joshua didn't go in and grab it. His disciples had to do it. When you are with a disciple trying to find the kings hidden in their cave, they have to be the one to draw them out. You cannot draw them out for them. You can empower them, encourage them, and lead them the entire way. Just like Joshua. Joshua never leaves the scenario. He is there the entire time, giving direction after direction, giving leadership after leadership opportunities, and telling them exactly what to do. And he says, bring them out. The kings have been identified, and they are brought out. And this is what Joshua does next. He said to the chiefs of the men of war who had gone with him, "Come near, put your feet on the necks of these kings." Then they came near and put their feet on their necks. And Joshua said to them, "Do not be afraid or dismayed. Be strong and courageous. For thus the Lord will do all to your enemies against whom you fight." And afterwards Joshua struck them and put them to death. Joshua instructs his disciples to put their feet on their enemies' necks. This sounds pretty barbaric, doesn't it? It wasn't about stomping them down. This was a symbol back then of who ruled over who. Joshua is showing his disciples who rules who. See, these kings used to be pretty powerful. Powerful enough to rally 5 armies together and surround Gibeon. Powerful enough to put up a fight and intimidate Gibeon enough to call for help. That's a lot of power. But see, Joshua is showing them, these kings don't rule over you anymore. You rule over them. Putting their feet on their necks is saying, you don't rule over me anymore. I have authority over you to strike you down. This is a picture of Genesis 3:15 where it says, "I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and he shall bruise his heel." Every enemy you face, Jesus has given you authority over. He has come and died on the cross so that every enemy you face, you can put your foot on their necks and say, you don't rule over me anymore. I rule over you. I drew you out of the cave. I fought the battle. You hid in the cave. I will draw you out, and my disciple will help me execute you. You see, Joshua doesn't shake off his responsibility to someone else. Executing kings was certainly not a fun task. It was messy. It was brutal. It was hard. And Joshua owns it. Because he gave his word. And because he has to teach them how to do it. It says, Joshua struck them and put them to death. He is taking full ownership of the covenant he made with Gibeon. He holds up to his word and shows everyone, Israel, Gibeon, his disciples, how to execute their enemies. You see, when you are with your disciple, you're with your spouse, your wife, with your children, and you are fighting this battle, you are drawing enemies out of the cave, past hurts, unforgiveness, unconfessed sin, abuse. When they finally draw that enemy out of the cave, it's not time for you to leave. They need you now more than ever. Sometimes they're hard to look at. Sometimes these enemies can seem intimidating. They used to have a lot of power. They do not anymore. Christ died if you have authority over them. He teaches them how to finish the job, how to execute on the word that he gives. And he shows them these kings no longer have authority, and he helps them deal with it right there. It is up to us, disciple makers, to show them how to handle it, how to heal, how to move forward in faith. Teaching them, if you will just bring the king out of the cave, we can execute it together. And he won't come back. When you leave the king in the cave, he'll come back. This is what it means to execute. Execution is a mentality that when you start something, you finish it. Joshua was an executor. He went to battle for Gibeon. He started it. He wanted to finish it all the way. I want to be a disciple maker who wants to finish, who wants to take everything I have, expect the miraculous, and take every disciple to help them execute every enemy. Turn to 2 Corinthians 10. Second Corinthians 10, 4 through 6. The weapons we fight with are not the weapons of this world. On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. That is exactly what we're talking about. Bringing kings out of caves to execute them is demolishing strongholds in disciples' lives. Demolishing a stronghold of victim mindset, of fear, of distrust in leaders, sexual immorality, impurity, greed. The weapons you have may not be a sword and a spear, but these are much greater. The Word of God is much better at executing enemies than any sword ever will be. We demolish arguments and every pretense that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. Joshua was demolishing the enemies of Gibeon. He was taking captive the kings and executing them. In verse 6, we will be ready to punish every act of disobedience. once your obedience is complete, ready to punish every king hidden in every cave. What a dreadful day for the kings hiding in that cave. What a dreadful sight to face down eye to eye with a son of God holding a sword. What a terrible sight to see for the enemy. And that's you, and that's me. We are the sons of God. And what a terrible day when the enemy's forces, the strongholds in our hearts, come face to face with one of us. What an awful sight to see for them. Because the sword that we hold is not a weapon of this war, of this world. Has divine power to demolish strongholds. Demolishing something. Talk about execution, right? As a discipler, it can't be enough to just start the battle. It can't even be enough to give it all, everything you have. You have to finish what you started. We must execute every enemy. Would you stand with me? Worship team, would you come up? There is no king too mighty for the sons of God. There is no stronghold too deeply rooted. No king too far hidden in a cave that cannot be exposed. If it is brought into the light, it can be executed. When we are faithful to do it, what does the Lord say he will do? Do not be afraid or dismayed. It's easy to feel afraid when you're face to face with that king who used to have a lot of power over you. Facing it down. Fear is the first thing that rises up, I know in me. Facing something that used to eat my lunch. And now I'm told to put my foot on its neck. Be strong and courageous, for thus the Lord will do to all your enemies against whom you fight. This is a promise we as disciple makers must stand on. That if we are faithful to draw the enemies out of the cave, bring them into the light, and put our foot on their necks, the Lord can execute every single one of them. Every time we are faithful to go to our disciple and fight the battle with them, the Lord is going to send the stones. He is going to send a sun that's not going to fade. He has promised to hold up his end. But we have to go to fight. We have to keep our word and march all night if we have to. If you know that with your disciples, with your family, you haven't been giving everything it takes, you haven't been willing to march through the night, I want you to come and stand up here in this corner. If you know, I haven't been willing to pay the price for my disciples, for my kids. I've shaken off the responsibility. I fell asleep when I should be awake. Haven't sought the Lord on their behalf, but given them leftovers. That's you. Come up here. Disciples, if you know you have some enemies you've been neglecting in a cave, if you know you have hesitated to finish the fight, to draw them out, and the Lord is pressing on your heart to bring something into the light that you know is there, that you've been fighting for too long, but you have not executed, I want you to come up here. For thus the Lord will do to all your enemies against whom you fight. Disciple makers, if you see your disciples up here, come and find them. Go to war for them. Home group leaders, if you see someone in your home group there without anybody, find them. Go after them. Go to war with them. Give whatever it takes and help them execute their enemies. Help them draw things out of the cave and end them for good. The Lord promises He will execute every enemy that is exposed. For those of you over here, the word that Josh